Welcome everybody to another Game Dev Roundtable here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Our panel is back for another discussion about game design. And for this episode, we're going to be talking about, the joy of numbers, or specifically incremental games, the idols, the cookies, and all the clicking that has happened over the past decade, or even more than that. It is a genre that from the outside it's easy to look at as just being a very simple, mindless fun, but there are some really good lessons in game design and progression built in. But as always, I'm going to give our roundtable a chance to go around and introduce themselves, so we'll start with Tomo, go to Ramin, and end with Seth. So, Tomo, go right ahead.
Hi, my name is Tomo Moriwaki. I've been a game designer for 25 or so years. My claim to fame is being the creative director on Spider-Man 2 way back in 2004. And since then, I have been at the game design helm of a small dev studio of my own founding called Hyperkinetic Studios, and we have a game on Steam Early Access called Epic Town.
And down to Ramin.
My name is Ramin Shokrizad. I'm a co-founder of a company called Eravant that we are building a social platform to improve the value of games that don't have a social layer or a strong metagame by adding that to those games to boost the value of other existing content. I'm a pioneer in the areas of game monetization, game economics, and game ethics.
Right, and to Seth.
So I'm Seth Goldberg. Currently, I'm running a project that aids in the discovery of cool strategy games, but my claim to fame is in and out of IT and development games as well as business applications. Worked for Origin Systems doing a little game called Ultima Online. You might have heard of it. Had my own company doing various games. We'll be talking about some of that in the podcast because they were incrementals.
Mm-hmm. So this is a genre that, for me in particular, I am definitely very versed in playing them. It seems like every few months I find a session, play hugely for 4 or 5 weeks, and then I will move on to the next, like a plague of locusts going from one game to the next. But it is a genre, again, that when people think about, probably the one that's the most famous, I would say, would be something like Cookie Clicker. It's the first one that really blew it up. And I guess the first question I want to kind of go around the table and ask everyone here is, what are your thoughts on idle game and idle design? So we'll kind of go in the same order. So Tomo, Ramin, Seth, and what do you think?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like I have a ton to say about these idle games. And I'm not going to say all of it, but I think the kind of starting summary is the basic idea that if you can strip away all the mechanics from a game and leave it with inputs and changes in rate of progress and make a toy or an experience that people find interesting, there are some essentials of game design I need to learn from that. I think that initial seed, in terms of my perspective on the genre, did eventually lead me to like the genre quite a bit, and so now I'm into those games a lot, and I like various games that are various approaches to incremental games, and I skew though very heavily towards sort of the longer term transformation of the kind of patterns of interactions that players have, and kind of playing around with how narrative can sort of fit into that structure.
All right. To Ramin?
Well, I'm not your typical idle game player. I don't really find them that stimulating generally. But I do find it fascinating to see, say, what a single-player idle game does, and then compare that to what maybe a mobile game does that has an energy system that limits how much you can do so that you are expected to keep logging back in day after day. And I can imagine if that path was continued to what to me would be the logical conclusion of a massive multiplayer idle game that wasn't pay to win, that you would have a huge winner on your hands. But no one's ever done that. They've stopped at the point of allowing you to buy your way through the time or progression system, put you in a competitive system, and create it as a pay to win game, which breaks the game for everybody, including the person spending. So they never really reached the point where you would get a really successful game because they just self-sabotage.
And Dylan have some thoughts on that in terms of a paid idle game, but we'll say that for later. So over to Seth.
So, I was discussing the history of the idle games in the Discord earlier today, and I really gravitate more towards an incremental style game where the idling is a secondary concern to optimal stat allocation, setting up your idle time correctly with the proper. And part of that is because I enjoy strategy gaming and I enjoy the mental thing. There's as I get older, I have less time to really put into a game. I mean, Baldur's Gate, I've put in like 10 hours and nowhere even close to, getting anywhere in it. And the thing is am I really going to be able to play 100 hours to finish Baldur's Gate? I'm not sure. So I play a lot of incrementals, and actually it was Tomo that got me started on this round of incrementals. Because he's always playing them, and I see it on his Steam thing, and he's playing, idle Minions, I believe, for a while. And so I started, following what he was playing, and then I started branching out on my own. I'm currently playing Idle Spiral, which is probably one of the best-looking idle games, just because it's geometry. And the math is well above my pay grade. There are formulas in there. I don't even know what the hell the symbols mean. But it's a cool game. And if it keeps you interested, that's great. And like Tomo said, if you strip away everything and you've got just this dopamine machine or something that keeps you at least mildly intrigued, you've got something that you need to study and look at. Again, I don't mean to gush on Tomo, but he once said that if you're going to learn one game genre, make it idle games. And that says a lot for a genre that, as far as I can tell, has existed since the gaming has started. I mean, I could probably trace it back to the 70s on mainframes if I wanted to. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, I'm where you are, Seth, in terms of the ones that I like kind of lean towards like that level of like min-maxing that we see from like a good strategy game or a good logistics game, where the goal isn't just to like sit around and wait for something to get done in 5, 10, 20 hours, but you're trying to optimize what you have going on so you make the most out of that. I've been playing the latest one, Desynced, in terms of the logistics side that I've been enjoying. I've been playing from the idle space, Orb of Creation, that was recommended to me that I've been really liking. I'm debating that's even really an idle game. Like, it feels like you're not supposed to like stop, like turn away from it, because there's always like 20 things going on at once.
I think it's an active incremental would be the right way to phrase that one. It's not very idle. I just did an interview with another developer like a week and a half ago, who is the developer for Verses of Enchantment, a roguelike with poetry.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
and
yeah, awesome.
He suggested Orb of Creation to me, and it's pretty cool, but it's pretty active. It's very demanding.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that's kind of, I think, one of the tough things. Like, to get back to, I think, as you were saying, and of course with Tomo, about in learning what makes a good idle game, there's that very interesting line, I feel, in terms of how much engagement there is. And I also want to pull Ramin on this, again, with your background in terms of like mobile design, mobile games, that for a lot of these games, I even find this with the mobile industry or the mobile games I've played, that there's this point where if I'm either too little engaged or I'm too engaged with a game, that it generally tends to lose me. And like to build what Seth was saying in terms of like Baldur's Gate and time, that if I find like a game like it demands too much of my attention, that I've played some mobile games where you have to spend at least like 40 minutes plus a day as the daily play. I just feel like I can't commit to that. But conversely, there have been and conversely there have been some games where I just feel like I sign on, I do one thing, and then that's it. I just feel like I don't have any connection to those games either. And I want to kind of go around and ask everyone about, like, where you feel like that line of engagement needs to be in order to, like, keep someone engaged in, like, a very short gameplay loop like this. And this time, I want to start with Ramin again, because you definitely have the background among us in terms of, like, the mobile space, in terms of, like, this respect.
Well, I mean, Seth brought up dopamine, which I think is something that deserves to be addressed here. Dopamine is a stimulant chemical that's released by your own body. Typically, you get the greatest release when you've experienced a situation where some threat was involved and you succeeded, and the greater the threat that you overcame, the more unlikely it was that you would win, the greater the release of dopamine. So that's like when you see these movies about the underdogs in hockey or whatever, and it's 99% chance they're going to lose, and at the last minute they get that last hockey puck in right before the end of the buzzer and they win, and everybody just goes crazy over the whole country. That's because that was like the ultimate cliffhanger win. Whereas if you already know you're going to win, I mean, and you do, you don't get anything. In most games, especially idle games, I get this feeling that I'm automatically going to win. It's just a matter of how long do I want to sit there in my chair or go and do something else and come back, and it's going to be done for me. So you can't assume that dopamine is going to be released in a game just because you got something. If you got something but you don't have this feeling that there was any chance you wouldn't get that thing, then that's not going to be a dopamine generator. It might be some sort of sense of accomplishment, even if it's minor, but it's not going to be a dopamine stimulation. So, I mean, I haven't played Orbit Creation in a while, but as I recall, there were ways to pooch your setup so that you would kind of get stuck. And so, you kind of have to watch things and keep an eye on things to make sure that you're able to progress, keep progressing instead of just leaving it that way. So, that made me feel like I was like, yeah, cool, and I felt good that I had unlocked this next content that was in the game, because there are substantial changes in the gameplay as new content is released. I found that interesting enough, and I found the math interesting enough because I like math games, obviously. That I felt challenged in that game. If I don't feel challenged, then I quickly lose interest, especially if the game feels like an Excel spreadsheet. I don't, despite people assuming I do a lot of work with Excel, I find Excel extremely boring. I don't want to do it in my games. But a lot of games I play, especially mobile games, feel like I'm playing Excel spreadsheet. In fact, I can tell which Excel spreadsheet I'm playing because it's been copied. Like, for instance, GameOpt will take the same Excel spreadsheet and slightly change it from game to game and just put different graphics on it.
Yep. Seth or Tomo, either one of you want to give your thoughts?
If you want to talk, Seth, go for it. I can.
So I have ADHD, and part of ADHD is a dopamine deficiency. A system, the executive functions in your brains do not work typically as neurotypical folks do. So it's interesting because I get, the sense of progression. I get the sense of some sort of enjoyment. I obviously like these games because I keep coming back to some of them, but I don't know exactly why I prefer doing those over some other more meaningful gaming. I'm getting something out of it, and I really don't know what. So that's a good sign for the developers. Probably a bad sign for my workload because part of ADHD is avoiding everything you're supposed to actually do and doing other things. That turns into the idle games. But you do what you can. One of the things I really look back on is that, when they started exploding, you had the Facebook games, and that's where I got involved with Pirates of Somalia, which was essentially something akin to the Mafia Wars formula, where you had a certain amount of turns, and during those turns you would hit buttons that would increase things. I added in some game design into Mafia Wars, the formula, where instead of just hitting a button, you would have to have certain stat checks and the results of various things. Like if you were to crawl in the sewer, it would reduce your charisma, which could prevent you from doing another action or some other type of action. So you would do your turns, and then you would wait for your turns to refresh. Or you could spend money to buy more turns, which means the game is inherently pay to win. And that, and Ramin's 100% correct. If someone could get, an MMO where it wasn't pay to win, what would that look like? And I think that's a great thing to think about. Mm-hmm. I haven't touched my character in 300 days, and look where he is. Who can not play the game the best? The ultimate if that's not meta, I don't know what is. So, and from there we had the Farmvilles, and then those games. I remember when the App Store first came out, there were like thousands of Mafia War style games, and incrementals. And then the clickers came along, where you're just hitting a button, and they were very primitive. And then Cookie Clicker kind of took the clicker aspect and turned it into something really, really interesting. That game is fantastic. And there are other ones that really went somewhere with it. If you have a chance to check out, obviously Universal Paperclips is one of them. There's one where it's potatoes in orbit.
I can't remember the name of it either.
It's an enclosed experience. It has an end, which a lot of these games don't have an end. And you start sending out probes, and the probes wind up defecting, and it's just it's a crazy game with the potatoes. I don't know.
Pretty sure I own it too. I can't remember the name of it.
It was actually made. It was published by. I want to say maybe Versus Evil or Diablo.
I think I found it.
Space Plan.
Yep.
What was that?
Or there's also Idle Potato. Space Plan.
Yeah, Space Plan. The sound is really, really good in it, and it's a little bit of graphics in it. It's kind of cool. A Dark Room, I believe, was one of the other experiences along the lines of Idle. So, it's not just these long progression games. You can make a contained experience in them. I was trying to come up with a game design around the concept of an idle game about building an idle game.
Nice.
And, I'm still working on it. I've got a couple of pages of design that I'm not crazy about, but we'll see where I go with it. Right now, it's your stereotypical incremental. And that's not really what I want. I want, a completely meta experience. So, fourth wall breaking, the whole 9 years. So we'll see where that goes. The player will go insane at some point. That has to happen.
All right. And to Tomo.
All right, and refresh me on the specifics of the question again.
I guess about where do you see good and bad idle design in terms of the level of engagement in it?
Yeah. All right. So first of all, the question about what is too much and what is too little, right? I think that you can explain a game that demands too much from you becomes exhausting, and if it doesn't give you a way out, right, you'll get exhausted and you won't come back. I mean, Ramin's experience probably can define that with some mathematical certainty, would be my guess. And then, of course, obviously on the bottom end, it's it's not even interesting enough for you to wake up and give it a shot. And so, but in that range, there's actually, it's not like there's a sweet spot there, right? That's a big wide range of potential engagement, and some people have more or less tolerance on either end of that spectrum. I do think, though, that there is something to be said about the idle games that is not present in sort of the rest of the genre or rest of the game genres, because so much of the other games kind of come from a place where they never questioned the idea of continuing to engage the player. And this isn't, I mean, mobile games actually come from this, don't have this, maybe we can call it a defect actually, where, and I remember feeling this, when we were making games in the early 2000s, we would have never thought to question, would it be better? Could it ever be worse to engage the player more? That was never on our minds. We would have never questioned ourselves in that particular way. And I think that idle games as a genre is fundamentally questioning that, right? It's not trying to be your hottest, most engaged, most present even experience. There's so many things about great experiences that we describe, and idle games aren't trying to do any of that whatsoever. Well, they're trying to do hardly any of that, right? They're like, well, what about you're hanging out in the garden and you're enjoying the birds and the sunshine and a little walk? Is there something we could do is there something we could allow for you to do that could add to that? And maybe just a little bit of mathematic optimization is just the thing for you. And I think that they found some truth in that space. Obviously for me, and Seth brings up ADHD, and I don't know for sure if I have it, but my kids tell me that because coffee doesn't make me awake, that's at least a sign.
It is.
And and one thing, in terms of I don't know if it's dopamine that's being released, but in much the same way that I optimize my choices for a game like Civilization, and get satisfaction out of that from turn to turn to turn, that it is a very sort of metered release of some kind of what I would say is a very good drug, maybe not an intense one. That the idle games that I prefer definitely deliver that, and they can sometimes deliver it in a more sustained and long-term fashion than many other games that I've played.
some of the free to play games can certainly be called incremental or idle games, and I think a lot of those don't respect your time. They have those 80-hour daily loops where you have to do things for 2 hours a day, and I don't think that's a sustainable game for a player long term. I mean, eventually they're going to burn out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and how long do you play anything? At some point, it just gets ridiculous, right?
I mean, I've been playing at least one of them for years, but I don't put much time into it from day to day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like for a lot of like the mobile idle games, they are just. I've tried a few like the ones that came out this year or this past year, and they do fall into that same trap of like to what Ramin was saying about like the pay to win aspect. That hey, your character report isn't strong. Why don't you go roll in the gotcha so you get a better character, and maybe you'll get another hour's worth of progress, and then it's back to spending more money, and it got very tiresome. And even though again it's like very low engagement, it's just like why even bother like turning it on if all I can do is maybe 20 seconds and I gotta wait another hour before I do something else.
Development is caught in a money replaces time paradigm. So I think that's one of the problems that maybe going forward we can attempt to solve. Go ahead, Ramin.
Well, part of what makes progress meaningful is that the player has to perceive some sort of change. There has to be some sort of contrast. Things that don't move, things that don't appear different than their background are invisible to us. Pretty much all mammals operate this way. So if your assets in an idle game end up being 10 times larger than they were the last time you logged in, that doesn't really have any meaning to you. It's invisible. It could be 1,000,000 times more. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't really create that contrast. What I see as the best way to create that contrast is to compare your progress to someone else's progress. That way you can see, it's whether I've multiplied my assets by 10 or 1,000,000, it doesn't matter. What matters is, am I ahead of Seth? Am I behind Seth? I can measure that. That has meaning to me. Mm-hmm. And that's why having even an idle game in a multiplayer environment, to me, makes much more sense. So the decisions I make when I'm playing the idler can give me an edge to make me move ahead, or if I'm just being lazy, I'll fall behind, but I'll feel like I deserved that because I didn't work at it. It all breaks down where I can just break out my credit card and say, here, now I'm ahead of you. That's not a strategic decision. It's just a financial decision. And this was really promoted by Zynga and Roger Dickey when he was promoting the fun pain, where they would try to make their games have these periods of boredom intentionally. They would intentionally make their games bad. And they did a good job at that. And they would discourage people from playing them unless they spent some money to get past the painful grind. Even Blizzard, I say, it could be accused of this. Where where it would just get boring unless you spent enough money to get past the fun pain of being slowed down, and then you could speed up again. In a competitive game, that ruins the experience for you because now your dopamine levels have gone down because there's no longer a risk of failure. And it also ruins the game for the other players because they feel like their actions don't matter anymore because someone else just pulled out the holy credit card and blew them away. So I think the easy solution, like what was done in games that I helped design, like World of Warships or World of Tanks Blitz, or the repairs I did on World of Tanks, with the business model there, you can't just spend your way to victory, especially in World of Warships where we got rid of all the premium ammo. But you could buy a subscription, which would basically double your progress. So you would get a faster feeling of, you get the rewards you get from going from, tier to tier would come quicker. Would make the game more stimulating, but it wouldn't break the game and make it unfair compared to other players. You would still be matched with players of your tier, and even if you had a game where it was like an open world game, and you had a similar system where you could progress twice as fast with a subscription, you still couldn't get ahead of anyone else that had a subscription. So people who wanted to play competitively would be subscribed, but they'd still be on fair footing with everyone else who's subscribed. And then other people would just be kind of just lurking and not taking the game too seriously until that point where they feel they want to, and then they could subscribe. So that the thing is, if you can just spend an unlimited amount and keep hitting that button, because you're targeting people with ADHD that need that stimulation and will be vulnerable to that. First of all, I think that's taking advantage of people with a handicap. I don't think that's unethical. I mean, I don't think that's ethical. But the other part is it just ruins the game for so many other people that you'll actually make less money in the end, which is possibly an even greater concern for me than the ethics, at least when I'm playing with other people's money and I'm developing something. But I don't know. People see something makes money and they just go for it and they don't experiment to find out what could make more money, which is disappointing, especially in a world where we have so many ways to A/B test things.
I have a counter to that ethical statement. It is my belief that games like Skyrim are much less ethical because they won't ever ask anything more of me. They will let me destroy my life for just a small fee and never. They're doing it. They're doing it because they genuinely just want to destroy my life. They don't even want anything for it. They're just, go ahead, here you go.
It's fascinating you said that, because I just brought this up in private discussions with my company about how I feel like games like Baldur's Gate 3 and Starfield are destroying the industry, but maybe not the way you think they are. But I think that would take this conversation way off topic. So I'm a little reluctant to get into it.
That needs to be the next roundtable.
Well, we certainly do need to do a Baldur's Gate and Starfield talk one of these days. I
mean, I have unpopular opinions about that. I think because to me
too.
playing. I mean, I'll just say the synopsis of it right now. We can get into the weeds so I can defend my position in the future. But I don't need more Skyrim. But I definitely need more Divinity Original Sin 2. That's the way I'll put it.
Well, I think we definitely know what we got to talk about next time.
I personally do not believe that anybody has ever played Skyrim, because I have only modded the game and tested mods and downloaded new mods and researched mods. I mean, I've never gotten past the wagon.
That's like how I have gigantic piles of paper full of armies of BattleTech armies for various point values to be used in circumstances that would never come to pass.
I used to have that as well. Back when I played miniature stuff.
Yeah, it reminds me of many games that I planned how to play and read the 100 or 300 page rule book, and then could never find anyone else who was willing to sacrifice that much of their life in order to have that experience with me. That's why computers are great, because they can do that for you, at least in theory, right?
Do you guys remember that game, Knights of Pen and Paper?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
How awesome if they would have a game like that, but then part of the narrative is not being able to find people to play with and endlessly grinding on planning for campaigns and characters and stuff like that.
Wow. Yes, I can't wait.
Hey, I gotta say, I did enjoy it quite a bit, and it's not like I put any small amount of time into that.
That's the fourth wall thing that Seth is talking about.
I really liked the discussion on the economy and trying in my head I'm trying to figure out how a fair MMO idle game would work when the people that would have played it before you would have a time advantage. And in the traditional idle paradigm, time equals progression. And how do you catch up to that?
In a mobile game, you do that by just starting new servers, and people just jump in when the new server starts.
I think if you were to draw an analogy to the existing games that are MMOs and just pretend that they were idle somehow, I think what you would say is that that sort of my personal number of prestiges in the game were incrementally adding experience points to my characters, and they were unlocking various abilities and various cosmetics and so forth, and that was sort of my long-term description of my account. But that every couple weeks that there were events that leveled the playing field and people were, competing against each other. And that's in a competitive sense. I actually don't think that the right way to make this sort of killer multiplayer idle game would be to have it be competitive, honestly. I think that the concept of cooperating to accomplish large goals and using idle mechanics to do basically sort of like crowdsourced min-maxing of too many freaking buttons, for example, would be a very strong experience for a number of people, and they could then start to socialize their sort of addiction to exponential expansion.
Now you're sort of making the case for the platform that I've been building for the last 3 years.
I think that there's plenty of case for it. And honestly, so much of what we were talking about, the problems I think are with the specific games people are making today. The conceptual or the sort of the thought experiment is just pretend that the games that we have today are idle games. And you can always create basically what amount to these sort of just like formulaic descriptions of the experiences that we currently have, and just track the outputs. If it was simply a matter of outputs, you could then look at the type of idle game every game is, and just start kind of like exploring the insights from that kind of a study.
Well, what do you mean by like pretending it's an idle game, like even if it isn't an idle game?
Like, what if World of Warcraft was an idle game? That actually you don't actually move around the world. You simply click buttons that maybe talk about what zones you're heading to, and you click a button that says that I want to join a group to do a dungeon, and then when I actually get to the dungeon, it looks to my stats and it simply just tells me how I did when I played the game, and that all it really is a numerical depiction of what has come before, and that I'm just the agent by pressing go forward button, let's say. That any game could be described that way. And some of those curves are more successful than others.
Blizzard did make steps to make the game more casual and more predictable and require less friction or less work to form a group, for instance, where they just made it so that instead of you having to spend all this social effort in order to build social connections to people and make friends and all this stuff, they just said, oh, that's too much work for modern people, so let's just remove all that. And you can hit a button and be auto-added to a group of people you don't know, will never see again, and then you can have your gameplay fix without all that stuff. And then simultaneously, third parties, in order to farm the game, are building bots so that they can go through even entire dragon battles without needing almost any input from the human. You could just combine those two technologies and say, oh, I'm going to hit this button to join an adventure, and then hit this button to start my bot, and I'll come back later and collect the loot.
Well, it's interesting. In my guild, I felt that those quality of life improvements, they made space for us to socialize with each other more. The enhanced convenience allowed for us to spend more and more time just sort of doing the interpersonal interactions. But that aside, yes, exactly. Like if you were to combine bots with being able to do things easily, I'm not saying that should be the game. Rather, that if you imagine that was the game and you took the outputs of existing players and mapped them out to the results that the game would spit out, that if that some of those versions of the game would be more satisfying to more or less people, and that the kind of like the progress curves, there are progress curves that are more palatable and more exciting to people than others. I think the big lesson for me in idle games is that, like you were talking about contrast. So there's this weird thing that I kind of only get out of idle games, and that is when I've unlocked X number of things and I stack them all up together, and next thing you know, I get in the course of like 15 seconds something, more number than I would have been able to get in the course of the last 15 days. And that's legitimate dopamine at that point, because it is like I am traveling to space. I'm getting so much stuff, and it wears off. And there is a sort of like I think it lays bare the sort of proportional reality to our perception. Like that exponential gain immediately stops becoming awesome after a little bit, right? Because going from 10 to the 9, 10 to 11, 10 to the 12, 10 to the 13th in the span of 15 seconds is awesome. But then once you get to a certain point, it'll take forever to get to 10 to the 16. Yeah. It'll take forever to get to 10, and it will take a year to get to 10 to the 18, right? Until you re-optimize the configuration, which now, because of that spike in progress, you're sort of invested in paying attention to the buttons, ultimately, the buttons to optimize how to get that going forward.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I really like...
In online games, especially in Asia, they have this thing where they just let you auto an event once you've 3-started or whatever, and they give you maybe you can auto something 20 or 30 or 40 times a day, and you have a budget, and you can spend more to increase that budget. So you can pay more to not play more of the game. Right. Which, again, is an indication that they're probably intentionally making the game boring, so that you will try to pay to not play it, which Blizzard also does. So you can pay to not play the game to level 60 or whatever they bump you up to now. So, oh wow, I can pay to not play your game? Take my money!
And which, I just say I'm nodding my head because Ramin is describing like so many of the mobile games I played over the last 2 years, and they had the whole skip feature, and yeah, it's one of those things that just annoys me when it's not there, but also annoys me when they want you to like pay for it. Hey, you gotta spend extra $20. We'll give you 20 more skip tokens, and then you can get your resource, but then you run out, and it just gets like, to me that's definitely like, again, like the bad kind of idle, where there's no real thought process. It's just, I'm just removing minutes from this game.
Yeah, at the risk of sounding like a prima donna, I think this is very bad game design. They just don't know what good game design looks like, so they're not really sure what to do in that situation. So I'm sorry, Seth.
I'm not sure that they even care about good game design. I think these games, in some cases, are just designed to force you into those walls, force you to pay money, regardless of how you're progressing. I think that's one of the things that back in 2010 I was trying to do, is take some of these incremental style games and put some real design behind them, some real player agency. A lot of these, I'm thinking about a couple of them now. I really like the aspect of having a guild and communications inside of some of these idle games. I think that's a really cool feature to keep you interested in the game. Real humans, yeah. Mm-hmm. Real humans are sometimes cool, sometimes not. I really like the idea of unlocking various mini games or side games or abilities or ways to optimize your stats, new formulas to go by, as you progress. I think, as Tomo was saying, going from E15 to E17 is not as exciting after a while. But if at E21 you unlock something that's going to enable you to do something different, play differently, and give you something to look forward to, you're vested. You're invested at that point. You want to see what's next.
Mm-hmm. I haven't shared with you guys the pivot I've made with my company, but originally the idea was we were going to build this incredible economy and this metagame and some progression through this new IP. We had this auto battler that you would be advancing through and getting bigger and bigger armies that you could battle through the auto battler. And as Web3 started to crash along with the crypto crash, funding started to get more limited, and we had to get a little bit more creative. But we thought this kind of pushed us towards thinking that really what we have here is something that what's amazing about what we're building is not the auto battler, even though the auto battler is really good. But the auto battler is expensive, and it's competing with other auto battlers. What we have that we aren't competing with is a social platform where we can multiply the value of any content that's attached to it by adding this social layer that games largely aren't built with, because it's difficult to do that. And you can build something that somebody might enjoy for an hour or 2 hours or 5 hours pretty easily, and you don't need all that extra complexity. But what if you had that you could dock that social layer to some other content? Like, let's say I wanted your team's, one of the things your team was tasked with doing today was to get your idler from 10 to the 3rd to 10 to the 7th. And I give you that task, and everyone you're in your team is trying to get their idler up to that point, which actually now it actually becomes like a time challenge, because you're trying to actually hit a specific goal in a certain amount of time. And if you do it, then the entire team gets rewarded because you're part of a team and you're contributing to the progress of the team in our social layer. And we could change what we dock to the social layer every day. So tomorrow maybe you're playing Space Invaders or Centipede or almost any game we can think of, as long as it's designed to give out the right output to our social layer, so we know you accomplished the task. And that's where we're heading, because I see that all these things that people have enjoyed in the last 30 years could be resurrected. They're dead content now because they're not revenue generating. But what if you could breathe new life into them by adding them to a social layer, and people could have fun doing all these little things that they would otherwise have fun with, but just not for very long. But when you're doing it for your friends, if I'm playing Centipede with a bunch of friends who are trying to get the high score, then all of a sudden it's fun again.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because, when I was, and this is actually from the perspective of a player fantasizing, not the game designer perspective, but, there's for the really complicated idlers, it's like what you want is you want more complexity. It's like I have been running my brain in circles around this labyrinth, which at first was overwhelming and I didn't understand, but now the map of that labyrinth exists in my head at all times, and there's nothing interesting about running laps in this labyrinth anymore. I need something else. I just wish it could change in a way that I couldn't predict, because even the changes, like I can tell you that the labyrinth's going to be this on Monday, this on Tuesday, this on Wednesday, and I know what's going to happen because I've been playing it forever. The way to get around that would be that I start having to dynamically optimize my my optimization choices around the dynamic choices of others. And so if there was this whole community of people trying to optimize, but kind of like loosely, if you were to imagine like a supply and demand analogy, that if you consume all the demand with enough supply, it's kind of the backwards way of saying it, that the demand is gone. And so that if you had, 1 million people playing an idle game, they can't all optimize the same way, because it would start to, the mechanisms you put into place would start to erode the efficiency of that kind of behavior. And this would be from a developer standpoint, it's a super fun kind of layers upon what are sort of optimized balances in the population for people to approach things in a certain way, actually maybe make room for a whole new slice of user, which is the ultra casual idle gamer that is optimizing but not that into it, and they're there for their guild. I mean, these thoughts they don't currently exist in the industry, and it'd be really fun to find them.
There are a lot of casual players that are exactly like that. They're just playing, they're into it for their guild, they've built up a social community. I'm in a social community on an idle game I used to play and become long-standing friends. It's been 3 or 4 years that we've been in this little community.
Well, very cool.
The game that you were just mentioning, you might want to take a look at Industry Idol. There is a player supply and demand system in it that's very interesting, and you're optimizing around what everybody else is doing, and it's doing things right. I fell off of it only because it looked like it required a little bit more intelligence than I was willing to give it. But it's really solid for some sort of multiplayer experience with a economy.
Mm-hmm.
This really does look very interesting, actually.
I apparently own
Is
it.
that feedback to Tomo or to me?
What was that?
I'm not speaking. I just commented that it was very interesting.
No, I mean, but Seth, were you giving feedback to Tomo or to me?
I was bouncing off what Tomo was saying about having other players optimizing and having to optimize around the other players. But no, I would suggest you could look at Industry Idol as well. It's a really solid game.
I think I saw it before the metagame was all in. I'll take another look at it. Yeah, another thing is that I was going to just add is different players like different types of activities. So we'll also intend to have things like, say, your team has to do so many things in an idle game, so many things in a arcade game, and so many things in a fighting game, for instance. And then team can break up how they want to assign people to complete those tasks to try to complete it. So that way, somebody might be the fighting game expert, and they're jumping on the fighting game. And someone else is better at an idle game, so they jump on the idle game. That way, there's more of this interdependency that I try to create on teams, so that everybody needs everybody else and their skill sets.
Yeah, I think that's really an interesting way to do it, and keeps people motivated. They have something to do.
If you create the rules just right, too, people, there's what is a typical group of 4, right? If you were to kind of get in there and redesign like Left 4 Dead, could you set up a role that doesn't seem balanced, that's actually perfectly suited to the 4th person that's they're just there for the ride? I mean, and I'm not saying this sounds like a very difficult challenge, but this is just really stimulating to explore.
As a quick time check, we are almost at an hour. I do have a few topics I want to ask everyone about, because they are some of the more interesting aspects of idle design. Then we'll kind of see where we're at. One thing that I wanted to touch on that we've been kind of dancing around in terms of kind of the advanced level of an idle game is kind of that meta layer or the persistent layer, or as we all know, the ascension modes. This is something that I find very interesting, because it's oftentimes where I think the rubber meets the road for a lot of these games, where if the ascension doesn't feel like it's really mattering, it just feels like the wind is knocked out of my sails. I felt that with Cookie Clicker, that I felt like, hey, I got to the end, I get 1 point, and it's you unlock 1.25 faster on the first thing, go, ascend 20 more times, and then we'll unlock the cool new feature. And then there's some that just feels like, one of the ones I was playing lately that Chris, I was watching a Chris Park play at Idle Slayer. They have this entire persistent tree, and the cost of all things get higher and higher as you get further in. It felt like it was unlocking really good things, but it also has that same issue of I'm waiting to get the fun unlock. I have to keep ascending until again I get something cool. And it's again one of the reasons why I'm enjoying Orb Creation, where it feels like all the cool stuff is just unlocking in the game. I haven't even finished the game one time yet. Now I'm afraid to see what happens when I win, and what's the next 100 hours of that game going to look like. But I want to ask you guys about kind of I guess the lure, or this why these modes are so popular, why they're so addicting, but also why they can sometimes just end up not working for someone.
It can't be too grindy, or you'll burn out, or the player will burn out. There has to be some sort of noticeable improvement from going from one ascension to the other, or you just you'll get bored out. It took me 30 days to ascend in Farmers versus Potatoes to the first ascension. And then maybe like 7 days to get to the second one. But the thing about that game, even though it's not done, is it kept me interested for those 30 days where I was looking for that ascension. Now, the third ascension is like the important one for the beginning ascensions. So, the second ascension was kind of like, I kind of felt like filler.
Mm-hmm.
Until you get to the third ascension where the game fundamentally changes.
Yeah, but that guy's all about really changing the game, right, from one phase to the next. Like I really like the Wizard and Minion Idol game that I'd probably put like a couple years into at this point. That's really like about it, and I just wish there was like well, I think it's just one guy with some artists or something, but it's I really wish there was more sort of like conceptual tech to the storytelling in there, because if you change the context of my UI experience so much that I'm thinking completely different thoughts to optimize, along with it could come like you could tell it inspired. What am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say here is that game inspired me to think about an idle game that tried to tell a story of epical changes in a timeline.
Well, because you have all the characters in Wizards and Minion Idol, and each one of them plays substantially different from the next one. Realm Grinder is similar to that. I think you could write stories in there.
Well, a story of some sort is happening, right? I think Realm Grinder, especially, you could actually the kind of sort of mundane expression is like, the elves and the dwarves get along now, and now I could run an ascension where I have the dwarven kingdom with the elves in support. But I'm not so much talking about what the words would be, what the characters do, but rather sort of just like entire shifts to the world, right? Like some of these, like Foundation crosses a large span of time, and some of the ways it gets that time change over into your brain is that everything's different now, right? All that stuff that from back then, none of that's the same. It's all done. That's way in the past, and none of those rules matter anymore. Although some of them do, of course. It's really interesting. I think maybe what I'm trying to say here is, because I don't want to get too bogged down on this example, is sort of like the freedom of rules to optimize in a game to make a number go higher allows you to try really unexpected configurations and kind of explore new thoughts. Like it'd be like a great class to teach kids, make idle games, but what you're doing is actually creating the shape of progress and frictions and affinities and how many paths to take and blah blah blah.
It should be the next game jam.
Sounds too complicated.
There's probably games like this that are really cool later on that I just got bored of before I realized there was more later on. I just didn't want to have to go through the same Excel spreadsheet for however long it was. So, I mean, maybe in those cases, maybe they just needed to signal to me that there was more content a little bit earlier. Whereas, like with Orb Creation, I guess they did a good enough job with that I could tell that the game was pivoting at certain points, and I was being presented with some choices, and I felt like my input mattered. Whereas maybe it does in these other games, but if I have to play for 30 days before I get to see the other content, that's probably not going to keep me from going to another game, since I move around the whole industry like the locust that Josh is describing. So
I think you can safely say that many of these games break too many rules when it comes to UI experience.
Oh, certainly.
Oh, yes. I was just thinking of one I tried. This was last year at Trimps, TRIMPS, and this was one that it's another very long-standing idle game, and it had that same issue I think Ramin was just describing. That it got to that point where I felt like, yeah, there's something cool coming, but when does it the real game begin, and that's always that risk with some of these games. There was a NGU, which was kind of like
classic.
yeah,
GNU Idol, yeah.
and I tried to play like their like Factorial like one, like the sequel that was released, or it could have been NGU Idol, and I stopped that one like very like early, like for me in terms of idle games. Like it just did not hook me.
Well, whether a game is an idle game or not is not a determinant of whether it is good game design or not.
Mm-hmm.
But how choices and information and clarity is presented to a player over the course of from time equals 0 out to however long you engage a person, that definitely is. And I think a lot of these games are sort of made by formulaic mathematic experimenters, and maybe sometimes those kinds of games are a little bit short when it comes to on the kind of like, hey, let's grab your attention and get you really excited and engaged, and then we'll start rolling with it, right? I mean, I feel that with a lot of these games, especially. And by the the kind of the opposite version of that is this game's got this great start. There's something mysterious. It's really engaging. There's something kind of beautiful that it's kind of tempting me with. And I get in there and then I take a few steps and I'm like, whoa, this game's not going to go anywhere. And that's not interesting either, right? And some balance between those two extremes is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Since you brought up Trimps, there's one incremental that I really, really like called Roll. And basically what it is you have 25 rolls of the dice, 2,500 rolls of the dice to score as high as you can. So it's a contained experience, and it's a high score chase. But starting with 2 dice, you then work your way up to tons of dice that are modifying each other and bonuses coming in for various configurations. And you're going, and there's a store where you buy upgrades. I really like that because it's a contained experience. You can play it in an hour or less, and you're done with it. But that's not an idle game. It's certainly an incremental, and I think that in the idle genre, there is the incremental, there is the clicker. I think those are all part one of the other. Not one facet of the whole. Wow.
Yeah, I was going to ask about games like Cult Simulator or Stacklands, or maybe this new crop rotation game that I haven't played yet. To me, these make a little more sense because instead of just going on to infinity, what's happening is you're trying to progress, but at the same time, as your progression is going up, maybe exponentially, also a debt or an external threat is going up exponentially. And if you don't stay ahead of that threat or that debt, maybe Luck Be a Landlord is like this too. I haven't played the game. Then your game will end when you fall behind the threat or the debt or whatever this existential threat is out there that's chasing you through the game. And the better you get, the longer you get to stay ahead of that negative exponential progression. To me, this makes sense, and it rewards you for getting better, gives you reason to play through the game again. It's kind of a little bit like an idle game, but it's not a game where your choices matter more because you have this essentially a time limit that's operating in the background. Do these count in our discussion, or is that too tangential?
Well, I mean,
I don't know.
I think that's actually a very reasonable explanation of sort of the core of what the idle games are, at least once you get to a certain point. That I think maybe a good basic example would be Clicker Heroes. So what Clicker Heroes is there's an exponential ramp, and that the steepness of that exponential ramp varies, and there are sort of like phases or levels or chunks of content to get through, and some areas the ramp of exponential resistance to your efforts is more and less. And I feel like when I was playing that game, and that was a long time ago, it got me to realize that pretty much any game is that. I mean, all the games we make are, you have choices and you have rules, and if you use those rules well, you get to make progress at a rate that is greater than sort of the resistance of the content. And granted, this is sort of like a very abstraction, generic language for what's going on under the hood. But at that point, cookie clicker could be sort of like topologically described in an indistinguishable way from something like super ghouls and ghosts.
Well, even something like Battle Brothers is. Even something like Battle Brothers is a little bit like that in the sense that there's some economics in there, and if you do well enough in the early battles, you'll probably have a better chance in the middle battles, and then you'll have a better chance in later battles. And if you don't learn how to navigate even the first few battles, you're going to get taken out, within a few hours.
Why is that game so harsh?
Well, but it rewards that skill up. So it's to me that type of progression is the exact opposite of what most idle games are like. You've got extremely casual as an idle game versus extremely hardcore, which would be a game like Battle Brothers.
Well, I think that all of the degrees of hardcore and casual exist in the genre too. Like, some of the idle games are just punishing mental exercises. Mm-hmm. And then others are, I can't even understand what the rules are because all you do is just give me stuff until I'm, maybe both those extremes are poorly designed though. Because like Battle Brothers is not a friendly game. And talk about dopamine hit, right? Talk about like nothing until, oh my God, things are rolling now. And now this game's awesome.
Well, it's got that XCOM ramp to it where you're just getting just absolutely everybody's disposable, and then you start kicking some ass, and then something happens and you roll poorly and your best character gets eaten.
That gives me Jagged Alliance PTSD flashbacks. In a good way. These are games that I've grown to love quite a bit in my life.
You've heard of CPTSD, which is complex. We have like GPTSD. Not to make light of PTSD, but just it's a joke. It's a joke. Disclaimer.
We've got the GPT conversation coming up soon, so we might all have PTSD from GPT at that point. Cultist Simulator is an interesting game, and I'm very intrigued that you brought it up in this context.
Because I got my ass kicked on it. I couldn't get past a certain spot. I die every time.
Mm-hmm. You have to get Book of Hours. You have to get Book of Hours. It's not punishing unless you want to.
That's what I hear. It's just like all my complaints about it. Yeah, all my complaints about Cultist Simulator apparently were fixed in Book of Hours, so I'll have to get around to playing it.
Mm-hmm. I would highly suggest it. I absolutely love it. I'm a big Alexis Kennedy fan. And I think Tomo could appreciate Book of Hours too, because the whole point of it is to tell the story. It's a narrative engine. Mm-hmm. You play the cards on various things. So, you would play a card on work and you would get money and you could use the money card to do something else. And you're advancing the story that way. And that's the very basic example of it. And it gets a lot more complex. I mean, a lot. It kind of reminds me of the complexity of some of the Infocom games.
Nice.
If you remember those.
But it's not trying so hard to kill you like in Cultist Simulator.
You can still die at the start, but they give you a little bit more wiggle room to get past it. It's after like the first 5 minutes you can survive, but the first 5 minutes are a little touch and go at the beginning.
Now we could probably lump that into the tutorial conversation because it doesn't teach you. It doesn't show you the rules of the game. You have to learn them as you go. And I was very confused at the beginning.
I want to talk about Void Stranger, the one that I'm playing right now from the creators of Zero Ranger, but that would be 2 hours if I start talking about that. I can't. But yeah, I want to have that discussion about tutorials and onboarding. That we need to get that one scheduled at some point too. There's 2 more questions I want to throw, and then we can wrap things up. One thing I wanted to ask everyone about. We were talking earlier about kind of a structured idle game. I think this is where kind of Cultist Simulator and Book of Hours also comes in. But have any of you heard of the game The Longing by any chance?
That sounds familiar. I have to look that up.
It's a mix of adventure and idle game. You play a character who's kind of in this kingdom. And the hook of the game, or the twist, is that the game takes place literally over 400 days of real time. So you have 400 days to play this game, explore, do whatever you want in it. And the game is just counting down on its own. If you just want to have the guy sit down in a chair and then turn the game off for 400 days, you can do that. If you want him, walk slowly around and look up stuff, you can do that as well. It's one of those games where I appreciate the heck out of it, but it is just completely against what I would be looking for in this kind of game. And there's another one I actually played during the IGF judging last year called Time. It was a Time Idol, or I can actually look it up. I add Idol to my list of dynamic collections just for this circumstance. Where was he? Time Bandit. It's a Idle meets Metal Gear Solid meets puzzle moving game that is it's also about communism as well. They just throw communism in as part of the lore.
Sure, why not?
Yeah.
Why not? Yeah.
It's absolutely crazy to play. And this is what I want to frame this around a question for everyone is, when we see, to go back to, I think, what Tomo was saying earlier about, we have, exponential idle games, like Cookie Clicker, Clicker Heroes, and so on. Then there are some that are more, storied or structured-based idle games. We could maybe even lump Cultist Simulator Book of Hours into it. What do you think about that as a point of gameplay? Because, again, I feel like there is a lot of potential, but it does also, I think, kind of, when the story is guiding the idleness, I feel like it's hamstringing me along a little bit. So, anyone, feel free to start.
I really enjoy something with a narrative experience and a contained experience where there's a start and there's an end that doesn't exponentially increase to infinity. That keeps me engaged in a way that I'd burn out from the other ones. Although, people have been playing some idle games for 10 years, as Tomo mentioned. That group that I talked about before, they're still playing. They burned out on the game. But they're still going strong. It's been 4 years. I don't like when you're constrained by real time because life happens. That's the same reason why any game that doesn't put a save mechanic in or allow me to pause it is usually downgraded by me because life happens. And so 400 days to play the game, that might be fine, but I don't know. I'd be afraid of missing out. Once you've lost a week, what's to keep you? Why come back? I've already lost it.
I like to make games that you can play for 4 more years. World of Warships, people are still playing it after 10 years, and they resurrected Arnold Schwarzenegger to do ads for it recently, so it must be doing pretty well. But I have a general rule that I don't want to force people to have to play more than 2 hours a day, which I think is a reasonable amount, in order to be competitive in the game. So the idea that you're suggesting for Longing sounds pretty cool to me, that you would actually have a limited amount of time and maybe if there's strategic decisions where one choice would open up one path and close another one, so that there'd be replayability, that would be cool. but I would want to make it so I would be limited to maybe only making 2 hours worth of choices or actions in that game, so then I could put it down and do other stuff and not feel like I'll never be good at the game because I have real life or something. Whether I do or not is is up for debate, but you know.
Which is, a big argument in the MMO community. People with no lives were able to advance further, and then we start talking about, can you use money to mitigate that and buy equipment?
I mean, if you don't want to play a game like that, you shouldn't. There's a lot of the games out there really are just sort of like executive function spillovers, mops, and you just like play first person shooter for 8 hours a day because you're a teenager and otherwise you'd be going crazy, and then at some point you slow down. And whether that's a good thing in society or not is probably a pretty decent conversation, but right, we don't have to play those games. They don't. It doesn't have to work for me. Although that said, I did put a lot of time into Destiny and Warframe in my time, and I enjoy grinding while shooting. That's actually, I remember playing Firefly back in the day and enjoying that too. But in the context of this 400-day game, it's an interesting example, but it is ultimately just kind of like an interesting experiment. There isn't, from a normal product standpoint, there's not a lot of people out there that are like, you know what I need? I think the idea sounds super fascinating. In fact, I'm going to have to give it at least one shot, and I'll probably just be open-minded and okay with, oh, shoot, the 400-day game. Did I just spend the last 3 months not playing it? Damn it. I'll go in there and I'll take a look and I'll try to play it a bit. Talk to my kids about it while I do it or something. Who knows? Story will make a big difference for something like that. For sure.
I wish listed it, and I'll probably pick it up one of these days just to see what it's all about. But that's not a good game to pitch to an investor. The deck for that is gonna look really weird. It's certainly more of an experimental game than a traditional game. Huh.
Even if that line is getting ever more blurred as time goes forward.
Yeah. I almost wanted to kill myself just for saying.
Well, I mean, in a conversation about idle games are often more experimental, than conventional, just in general.
AAA idle game.
Well, another reason why I would put a time limit on how much I want people to be able to progress a day is because the type of games I want to design are expensive to build, and they have to be able to generate enough revenue to justify that amount of work that goes in that game. And so my target audience will tend to be people that have jobs and families and stuff that want a quick but very high quality gaming experience and are willing to pay for that. And I don't want them to have to compete with somebody who is a teenager and has 8 hours to play and won't spend hardly any money in the game because that's not my target audience. I don't want to have to compete against games that are already doing a great job meeting the needs of those people, which might have been me when I was younger. As I got older, I try to focus a little bit more on making games for people like me in that sense. Though technically right now my company is experimenting with kids content, so I don't want to say that's a hard and fast rule.
I think World of Warships could actually be an interesting game for some for incremental style progression through fights, where a fight would lead to a certain expansion of territory and some sort of guilding system going that way and expanding out the game other than just the mech wreck or shipwreck of just bashing ships together.
The game was begging for a social layer, and I was trying to build it, but I couldn't keep the fourth wall company metagame together long enough to make that a reality.
Yeah. I think that's a big miss on their part for not going that direction.
If we're thinking about trying to create a dynamic environment for people to make to min max their idle game choices, why not have it based on just a player base playing some other game that where that like imagine if you had a large number of people who were bidding on the results of actual game sessions that other people were playing in some other competitive experience. And then that bidding and our resource gathering was driving a metagame, except that we had that in much the way people get totally addicted to min-maxing their imaginations with respect to sports leagues and stuff, we'd just be doing it off people playing World of Warships or League of Legends or StarCraft tournaments across the globe. I mean, that would definitely suck in some people.
There hasn't been a lot of movement in the States for this, but overseas, especially in Asia, there are management style games where you're managing an esports team, or you're managing a StarCraft team, type of thing.
Sports management in general, right?
Yeah,
it's in this space for sure.
There's some interesting management games out there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this begs the opportunity. Like, for instance, what I'm doing now is trying to make a platform to add these components to other content, because it takes more work to build a platform than to just make a standalone content game. But in theory, the platform could be eternal, whereas the game is going to have a somewhat limited lifespan. But if you have the platform, you could add those features to other games that there's no way in the universe they would have the budgets where they could include all those things just from the production of their individual studio. If you can add those extra layers from a platform and dock to that platform to get all that extra benefit, then that would be the way to go, especially if you could use that platform to resurrect dead content, which could also include all these cloud gaming attempts that didn't go anywhere, where you've got these companies with these huge libraries of games, but they don't monetize high enough to pay for the server hosting required with the cloud content. If you could get over that barrier to make them profitable, then they could become live content instead of dead content.
Mm-hmm.
When you
It's hard to give that pitch to an investor, though. It gets complicated.
When you add live services into an incremental game, it's kind of interesting because that's constantly driving the player. But I think at that point it turns into a different style of game. I mean, that's more of your traditional gacha or free-to-play game. Arknights has that thing where we were talking about before, where you could run a mission 30 times or something like that.
You mean auto-run it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or you just hit the button and you complete the quest 30 times?
Yeah.
And get the rewards?
Yeah, Summon Reward does that too. Sometimes they take some time. I think in Arknights it actually plays through it 30 times or whatever. But it's done at a high speed. You set it up once and then it keeps doing iterations of it.
Yep. Let's see. We're almost at an hour and a half, so I think this will be kind of like final question, final point, and then we'll wrap it up. But one of the things I want to ask everyone about is, like, where do you think, like, the future, like, we've been talking about, like, different prospects for evolving or iterating on idle design. So one of the things Ramin said at the beginning, we were talking about kind of, like, is there room for, like, a big budget idle game, or one that goes beyond just the normal free-to-play trappings? And I was thinking about Clicker Heroes 2. Like, this is the only time where an idle game was actually had a price tag on it. And the game has not done well at all. Like, I think it's still sitting at mixed. There's been a lot of issues with the game in terms of its design and structure. And a lot of people have complained about the fact that, why is this worth $20 where all these other idle games have been giving me hundreds of hours for free? And what I want to ask everyone is, like, is it possible to have an idle game with a legitimate price tag? We're not talking about like $1 or $4.99, but can you do like a $20 or $30 game that is just an idle game, or like are the two universes just too opposed in that respect?
I thought it would happen after Loop Hero.
Hmm.
Because Loop Hero was a runaway success. And I thought someone would jump in on that bandwagon in a larger organization and try to go that route. But no one did. No one took the bait.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that there's a reason why there are a lot of idle games right now. I think that the revenues they generate is actually pretty significant. It may not, it's by no means a top genre or anything. Now, granted, in the kind of the PC premium product space, it's a little trickier because people don't see it as a conventional game the same way, so maybe they won't be as interested in paying like sort of in quotes full price. But Loop Hero is a good example and if you take a look at the game, it's using learnings from idle games to build a indie game, or like these games that don't come from any specific genre, right? It's a game whose activity loop where it did not have a precedent. It happened to have sort of idle elements to it, or there were certain feelings when you played the game that were sort of related to those feelings. But it itself was a totally sound and complete game of its own, and as a result, it was rewarded in the marketplace by its users. I think that there's plenty of room for there to be games that are memorable and people find an interest in spending $14.99, $29.99, whatever. But those games maybe haven't been made yet. But that's kind of on the Steam PC side, right? Because on the mobile side, we have idle games that have made millions and millions of dollars and are a part of the big business. Sometimes we think icky business of big mobile games.
Yeah.
I would use the example of I guess Clicker Hero 2, I think you said it was, as an example of what I would probably call dead content. If you could attach it to a social layer and make that game either directly multiplayer by having a lot of people playing the same game at once in the same space, or indirectly multiplayer by having a bunch of people playing the game individually but competing in a time frame, so that they're still in a sense playing together, and then make that group progressive, then you could turn that into live content. People would pay for it either as a one-time fee or preferably, since I like games as a service, on a monthly basis as they're playing. Then you can turn that into live content, and really you could do that to anything if you have the technology to convert that to live content. There are thousands, if not millions, of games out there that are designed inadvertently as dead content or become dead content after a short period of time. They don't have the ability to convert it back to live content. So that's the technology I'm trying to develop, and that would also be a way of preserving old games that deserve to be played again, but just aren't because they're dead and can't be discovered anymore.
I certainly think there's room for a large, even a AAA style idle game, because if you keep, a lot of the ones that are out right now on PC, you can't have a live service on, say, an Idle Slayer, not Idle Slayer, Idle Spiral. The team's way too small for something like that. And a lot of these are individual developers or two developers, very, very hobbyist style programs, hobbyist style developers, sorry. Because the barrier to entry is really, really low. And idle game.
Yeah, but we have examples of success in the idle games genre. It's just not necessarily as apparent on PC, right? I mean,
yeah,
we know that there are potentially millions of people that are willing to play it all the time, and it's already been, it's live service, weekly events, get people to replay with the new promotion. There's leaderboards, so it's mildly social. Not the Candy Crush was ever very social to begin with, but it's the same kind of an idea. Like it's been weaponized maybe in that exact way already, but I think the real question is are we going to find ourselves like with completely new models of games that were grown from this DNA, right? That become accepted kind of as mainstream, and I think that that's at least a real possibility, even if that hasn't quite happened yet. It is worth noting. I think it's one of the East Side Games has a whole slew of idle games that are very simple, but very very replayable, and there is a very simple narrative attached to them, and that narrative progresses over the course of time. And things like a RuPaul game is doing just outrageously well. I knew I played the Trailer Park Boys game quite a bit, and it's because it's funny. That's a big part of the draw, is that brand works for me. But I think that also points to sort of like the method when mobile adopts is because they found a shape that they can use, right? And that there is a sort of a valid engagement path there. It might transmute it into something that maybe offends your own individual sensibilities, which I feel like it did for me at first. But it says something about sort of the core mechanics or the core gameplay, right? That there's something that it's not just a theory. It's something that's been validated in the marketplace. Where we go with it from there can be up to us individually as developers.
The thing about something like the Trailer Park Boys game is, I would look at that and I think back to, what my dad would call, just like generic artwork that you would find in an office somewhere. You call it schlock art. And that might be Yiddish. That might not. I don't know. But, schlock games, just thrown together, there's no real design behind it. And if there is, that's great, but they're not marketing in that direction.
I mean, well, the holy grail of how you determine whether a game is live or dead is if the LTV, the lifetime value is greater than the user acquisition cost, the UAC, then you just want to get that to as many people as possible because you'll make money. As soon as the amount of money you're going to generate per player goes down below the cost to get that player to play your game, the user acquisition cost, then it's a dead game. Even if it's still a great game, it doesn't matter because you'll lose money by putting it out there. And there's a lot of factors that can affect both of those numbers. But sometimes there's great games that are just a hair under profitable, and so they stop being provided, which I think is a shame. If there could be a way to just boost the value of those games, and this could apply to idle or any genre, then those games could continue on in perpetuity.
Mm-hmm.
Let a game continue on in perpetuity. Just because it can doesn't necessarily mean it should. Someone is still playing EverQuest, and I'm not sure that we need to put EverQuest to bed at this point.
Or just put more, do like idle bots in EverQuest and just collapse the singularity right there.
Oh my god, I remember multi-boxing in Dark Age of Camelot. That was great.
All right, but I think this is probably a good time to wrap. We definitely went over time, but it's a very fascinating discussion, and certainly one that, like we said at the start, there's a lot to learn, I think, appreciate about idle design. That, for a game that can be very addicting with very little input or very little like advanced elements, is certainly worth it from a game design perspective. But as we've said, it's a lot harder to do it right than you may think. There's so many little aspects of how progression works, where's that next hook's going to come from, that if you don't really pay attention to, it just ends up being like a very annoying experience. And like we said, like, the line of complexity is certainly fascinating. I think there's definitely more we could go into maybe in a future discussion about just how much people want, the depth of these games. Not just depth in like idle, but just depth in general. And when it's just become essentially work at that point of playing some of these titles. Because there have been a lot of games, I'm sure we've all played, where it just feels like you're no longer really enjoying the game, you're just kind of going through the motions of it. But With that said, my voice is like on its last legs, and I do have a stream to do at some point tonight, so it's really going to go out. I'll give everyone one last chance to go around, do plugs and all that, and we will say goodnight. So we'll go in reverse order this time. So Seth, you are up.
So I'm running the Strategy Informer, which is a, like I said earlier, basically our mission statement is to highlight cool games. And of course, they're in the strategy genre, which is a very wide genre. But yeah, you can catch me on Discord. You can catch me on the web. You can catch me on Twitter. I use social way too much. My links will be down below, I'm sure. We mentioned a couple of games that I think everybody should check out. We mentioned Wizard and Minion Idol. We mentioned Farmers vs. Potatoes. We mentioned Orb of Creation. We mentioned Industry Idol. And if there's any that you guys want to suggest, go for it, even though I stole some of
them. All right. And Ramin.
You're muted.
I'm Ramin Chokrizad. I'm a co-founder at Aravant. We're creating a bridge company between Web 2 and Web 3 that can also act as a platform to add a social and economic layer to other content to multiply the value of that other content. Right now, we're the next few weeks we're going to start testing in the Fortnite Unreal Engine user generate content platform to see if we can rapidly prototype some games in that space and see how that turns out. I'm very excited to see how it does turn out because it's looking pretty good.
And yeah, I'm Tomo Moriwaki, and co-founder of Hyperkinetic Studios. As I said at the beginning of the stream, we have a game on Steam Early Access called Epic Tavern, all about disassembling storytelling. And I guess that's all I got to say.
All right. And again, for me, if you're watching this and you're already on the YouTube channel, do all the liking, subscribing, check out the Discord and the Patreon, all my books. I now have a game recommendation newsletter tier for the Patreon. So if you're interested in game recommendations of all varieties, be sure to check that out. We'll be back with a roundtable again in the future. And now I really want to do the Baldur's Gate Starfield one, because I feel like we're going to get a lot of flaming out of that one for our opinions. But now I really want to do that one more than ever. But, gentlemen, as always, it has been a pleasure hanging out with you this evening. And we'll be chatting again, and I hope we do another one real soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. It's been a blast.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, so with that said, everybody, come back for the discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until our next chat, have a great evening.